roughly about 300 tonnes a week of coffee grounds are produced by the large branded cafes, like the high street cafes that you'd see regularly. About the weight of 22 double-decker London buses, so it's a large amount of coffee waste. That will get taken to landfill, and it gets buried in landfill sites. It's quite a bulky material. And underground, where you've got anaerobic conditions, it will break down and produce methane, which, as most people know, is 20 times more dangerous to our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. From that, you could produce 100 tonnes of oyster mushrooms a week. But to take this massively damaging process and produce 100 tonnes a week of a healthy, protein-rich, nutrient-rich, delicious food, I see as a massive opportunity, I think. Got quite inspired by the whole idea of a model for business of social enterprise, and not just kind of producing something for sale, but to have a kind of a wider environmental or social benefit as well. So I've set Fungi Futures up as a social enterprise, and I suppose the main aim initially is just to facilitate recycling a lot more coffee waste into food instead, but a longer term kind of idea or vision is to kind of widen that into also a kind of a social benefit by being able to help other businesses set up in every city in the UK. So you could almost have sort of regional centres collecting coffee waste from within that city and using it to grow mushrooms for sale in the local area. And it doesn't have to stop necessarily with coffee waste either. There's many forms of urban waste in particular which are kind of not really utilised at the moment, like breweries, for example, produce tons of spent grain and hops, which again is still full of nutrient, and mushrooms can grow off of that. So we're in the grow room here. This is the incubation room, and it's generally kept sort of 22 degrees, quite nice and warm, dry. Got fresh filtered air that comes in at the back there that just filters out spores from any other moulds or bacteria, and it's basically a place to propagate the mycelium, which to produce a mushroom you need a big bulk of mycelium, and from that it will produce mushrooms. All the white there is the mushroom spawn having grown across the coffee grounds, and it's now fully colonised its food source, and when you cut a hole in there it will then switch into mushroom production and begin to produce mushrooms. Originally it starts as a small piece of mycelium in a test tube. This is a master culture, and you take a very small amount, maybe half a fingernail's worth, and put that onto a petri dish plate like you used to have in school almost, and from that small piece of material there, it will grow outwards across the whole of the petri dish. It takes around about a week or so, and you then cut small pieces of that petri dish out and add it into a jar of grain, and it will then grow outwards and across the jar of grain. So you're effectively just taking a small amount of mycelium and expanding it up and getting more and more of it. One of these dishes, for example, you can make 3 or 4 jars of grain from, and from the jar of grain you add it into a bag of grain. Each jar of grain can do 3 or 4 bags of grain, and so the whole process is just kind of exponentially expanding. From the grain spawn, you then add that into a bag of waste sawdust, and this comes from a local timber frame company that have tons of wood shavings, and I just pick that up, and it's a perfect medium for the spawn to grow in. So you produce bags and bags of spawn. Each one of these can make 15 bags of sawdust spawn, and then from your 15 bags of sawdust spawn you then mix that in with the waste coffee grounds and some shredded cardboard. Here's one that's about a week or so after having been mixed up and incubated, and you can start to see the bits of white growing across the coffee waste and beginning to sort of fully colonise its food. And that takes roughly about 3 weeks or so till it's fully colonised like that, and at that point it's now ready to fruit the mushrooms. So in the space of about 8 weeks or so, we'll go from a piece of mycelium the size of your fingernail. You can have around about 1,000 bags ready to fruit mushrooms, each one producing about half a kilo of mushrooms or so. So this is where we do the the cultivation of the spawn itself, which is probably the trickiest part of the mushroom production, is the early stages where you're producing the spawn, and everything has to be done under very sterile conditions. So we kind of work in front of this air filter. This is a very thick, it's a HEPA air filter, it's about that thick, and inside there it filters out all the spores of any other fungi or bacteria that would be present in the air. Most people don't realise, but in the air they breathe, or their hair, their breath, there are hundreds of thousands of spores of other species that will try to compete with the mushroom spawn. And so really the process of cultivating the spawn is to try and eliminate as many of those other spores as possible, and instead to kind of create a condition favourable to the mushroom species that you want to cultivate. Scalpel over a flame just to kind of heat, sterilise the tip of the blade, wash my hands and arms down with alcohol, and that just kills any kind of anything that may be on dead skin or on my hands at all. And you tend to work from this side, so you'd be behind the petri dish and basically sort of take a piece of the petri dish, you'd add it into a sterile jar of grain, close the lid up quickly, and then it will go into the incubation room where it will be nice and warm and it will start to grow. These are probably one of the most significant investments I had to make in setting up, whether it's a stack of fresh petri dishes or a jar of grain before you've added the spawn to it, or bags of sawdust before you've added the spawn. They'd all basically go inside these pressure cookers a thing. It could fit whether it's 6 bags or 12 jars or hundreds of petri dishes. You basically would use this as your vessel to sterilise them. So you add them in there, add the lid on, turn the heat up and bring it up to, sits around about 120 degrees or so, and at that temperature is known to kill all living species. That will then cool down overnight, and the next morning you'll bring that now sterile substrate in front of the sterile airflow and add your spawn to it, and then basically your spawn has got a free run on its food source without having to compete with other fungi or bacteria. This is basically the centrepiece, I suppose, of the whole operation. Without this, you're not going to cultivate mushroom spawn, you're just going to cultivate green, blue mould and various different types of bacteria. So it's kind of fundamental, really. In terms of the running of the business, I had to invest around about £12,000 in equipment, and that was for the pressure cookers, for building the laboratory, the shipping containers, which is what the grow rooms are made up, retrofitted inside, and a whole host of sort of lab equipment and various other things I needed just to go from nothing into business. But the running costs actually week on week can be fairly low, because your raw materials are fairly cheap. Most of them are waste to most people, whether it's sawdust or whether it's coffee. So as a model, I suppose it's quite nice from that point of view. You haven't got lots of kind of large costs to run every week. Probably your labour is the main cost. It's probably one of the biggest benefits, I guess, of being self-employed or starting your own company is just, your opportunity to learn is something that you can decide on. Now you can drive forward what you want to learn about and how you want to learn it. This is another thing we just started playing with almost for fun, I suppose, if anything. It's bioluminescent fungi. There are many species around the world that give off this bioluminescence at night, and we just, out of interest really, wanted to see what it was like when we cultivated and whether it was something worth developing into a grow kit for people to do themselves at home. So this is a bag that's kind of covered in the mycelium. If you were to switch the light off now, within about 5 minutes or so you'd start to see kind of a faint glow, and after sort of 10 minutes or so, when your eyes have adjusted, you kind of see it a lot stronger. But unfortunately it doesn't look, this is what it looks like to a camera when you set the camera up on a long exposure to photograph. It looks great to the camera, but to the human eye the glow is nowhere near as kind of bright and green as that. It's kind of more of a kind of a faint whitish glow. So although it's really cool, and it's probably something I'll play with a little bit more and see if we can get it to glow brighter by changing the medium it's growing on, in the end it's probably something that we're not going to develop into a grow kit.